Harper Dwyer was supposed to give a class presentation that morning. Emma Carlisle had promised to save her a seat. But by the time the school bell should have rung, Harper was already dead, and Emma's name was next on the killer's list. It was a cloudy Monday morning in the quiet town of Millbury. The kind of town where people rarely locked their doors and students rode their bikes to school without worry. West Hollow High School stood tall near the edge of town, its red brick exterior unchanged for decades. That morning, the school seemed as ordinary as ever, but something was already wrong, and no one noticed. At 7:45 a.m., the janitor, Mr. Floyd, arrived as usual. He was a quiet man in his 60s who followed the same routine every day. He entered through the back service door and walked his way through the silent hallways. Everything seemed normal until he reached the east wing. There, just outside the restroom door, he noticed a strange stain on the floor. It was dark red and streaky. He assumed it was paint, maybe from the art students who often left their supplies lying around, and made a mental note to clean it later. Without much thought, he continued down the hall. The school day was supposed to start at 8 a.m. sharp. That was when the morning bell rang, followed by the national anthem and announcements over the intercom. But today, the bell never rang. The speakers stayed silent. The few staff members already in the building looked at each other, confused. Some assumed it was a technical glitch. Others thought the principal had cancelled announcements for the day. No one considered it might be something darker. Students began arriving by 8:10, filling the hallways with noise and chatter. Despite the broken bell system, classes slowly began. Teachers called roll, but something odd started happening. Several students said their names had already been marked as absent, even though they were standing right there. It was brushed off as a computer error. Just another Monday. Meanwhile, back in the east wing, the red stain had grown. Now it extended beyond the restroom door and down part of the hallway. One teacher mentioned it to the front office, but there were more pressing things to handle. Calls weren't going through, emails weren't sending, and the school's internal server had started acting strange. It wasn't until nearly 9 a.m. that someone finally opened the door to the restroom. A senior named Caleb had been looking for a quiet place to rehearse his lines for the upcoming school play. He figured the east wing was mostly empty that time of day. When he pushed open the restroom door, he expected silence. What he found made him scream. Within moments, the school descended into chaos. Teachers rushed to evacuate students, administrators called the police, and Mr. Floyd, the same janitor who had stepped over the red stain an hour before, stood frozen in the hallway, now realizing it hadn't been paint at all. Something terrible had happened inside the school. Something planned. Something calculated. And it had started with that single, silent stain. The police arrived at West Hollow High School within minutes of the 911 call. Yellow tape went up around the east wing as officers and forensic teams swept in. Students were quickly escorted out of the building, many in tears, confused and frightened. The image of Caleb being carried out by a teacher after fainting had already begun to circulate online, though no one yet knew what he had seen. Word spread fast. Someone had been found in the school restroom, and it wasn't an accident. Inside the east wing restroom, the scene was cold, controlled, and horrifying. The stall door where the body was found had been neatly closed, not locked. When officers opened it, they found 16-year-old Harper Dwyer slumped against the wall, her school uniform soaked in blood. She had no visible bruises or signs of a struggle. The injury to her neck was precise, as if done with professional care. There were no signs of panic. It didn't look like a crime of passion. It looked like an execution. A pair of latex gloves were left in the sink. A message was taped to the mirror with clear tape, printed from a computer. This was only the first. The words were chilling. But what made it worse was how calm everything else looked. There was no mess. No signs of forced entry. Whoever had done this had been in and out quickly, leaving behind only what they wanted the world to see. Detectives searched the area for clues. There was no murder weapon left behind. Harper's phone and backpack were both missing. Her ID card. had been found in her pocket, but it had been cut in half straight through the photo. It was like someone wanted to erase her identity. In one of the stalls, under the sink, officers discovered a small black device duct taped to the pipes. It was a digital timer. At the time they found it, the numbers were counting down from 3 hours. They stopped the timer, unsure what it triggered, if anything. It wasn't wired to explosives or connected to the building's power system. It beeped once, then fell. Silent. A strange warning, or a distraction as the investigation deepened. School administrators combed through attendance records and found something strange. Harper had been marked absent that morning, but several students had seen her walk through the front entrance at 7:30 a.m., right on time. Security footage should have confirmed that, but when police requested the East Wing camera feeds, they discovered the files had been deleted, only for the exact window between 7:15 and 8:00 a.m. The janitor remembered seeing someone walking toward the east hallway early that morning but couldn't recall the face. Just a figure in a school hoodie, head down, moving with purpose. It hadn't raised suspicion then. Now, it was a clue. As the sun dipped behind the clouds that afternoon, the school stood empty and silent. What had begun as a normal Monday morning was now the beginning of a horrifying puzzle, one that was far from over. The following day, the school remained closed as investigators swarmed the building. News vans lined the streets outside West Hollow High, and reporters camped near the entrance, eager for updates. Parents gathered in tense clusters, desperate for answers that weren't coming fast enough. The police had no suspects, no motive, and no clear indication of how someone had entered the school, committed the murder, and disappeared without a trace, all before most students had even arrived. Then, the situation took a disturbing turn. At 3:08 p.m., exactly 24 hours after Harper's body had been discovered, a video was uploaded to a newly created social media account. The video featured surveillance footage, specifically from the East Wing restroom. It showed Harper walking in alone, pausing briefly at the mirror, and entering the stall where she was later found dead. The video ended with a black screen and a message in white text: "You are not watching closely enough." The account was traced back to Harper's phone, which had still not been found. Authorities were stunned. The device had been shut off and presumed destroyed, yet now it had somehow reconnected to the internet and shared footage that the police didn't even have access to. The killer hadn't just taken a life. They were taunting everyone who was trying to make sense of it. The school's IT department was brought in to help with the investigation. They found that several computers on campus had been remotely accessed in the early morning hours before the murder. One of those computers was located in the nurse's office, which should have been locked and unoccupied at the time. Yet records showed someone had logged in using administrative credentials at exactly 6:11 a.m., an hour and a half before Harper was last seen alive. From that computer, someone had manually marked Harper absent for the day and altered the access logs for several hallway cameras. This was no amateur. Whoever had done this knew the school system inside and out. They had covered their tracks, erased digital footprints, and timed everything with careful precision. It became clear that the killer wasn't just someone who had snapped. This was calculated, planned. A message was being delivered. Investigators reviewed every inch of footage from other areas of the school, hoping to catch even a glimpse of the suspect. One camera, located in the cafeteria hallway, picked up a blurred figure in a school hoodie moving toward the east wing just before 7:30 a.m. The person never returned on camera. They had either exited through a blind spot or never left the building. At all.as theories circulated, fear began to settle into the community. Parents kept their children home. Students posted rumors online. Some said Harper had been targeted for something she knew. Others believed she was simply chosen, at random, a victim of someone who wanted to make a statement. But one theory stood out among the noise. The killer was still inside the school. And they weren't done yet. The pressure on the investigation mounted as fear continued to grow in Millbury. The discovery of the video uploaded from Harper's missing phone had shaken both law enforcement and the community. It was no longer just a murder. It was a performance. Someone was carefully orchestrating each step, and with every new clue, the puzzle only deepened. The killer wasn't hiding in the shadows anymore. They were watching, waiting, and possibly right among them. The FBI joined the investigation and began analyzing the digital timer found under the sink. It wasn't connected to any explosives, but that didn't make it meaningless. Experts believed it was symbolic, meant to draw attention to something or someone. The countdown had ended, just before the video was released online. That wasn't a coincidence. It was a signal, a reveal. Someone had timed Harper's death and the release of the footage to line up perfectly. As if following a script, forensic teams re-examined the crime scene and found something that had been missed the first time. Behind one of the ceiling tiles, in the restroom, tucked inside a dusty vent, was a flash drive. It contained a folder labeled "Innocence is a Mask." Inside were dozens of photos, candid shots of students in various parts of the school, mostly taken from high angles, possibly through security cameras. Harper appeared in several of them, often alone, sometimes with her friend Emma Carlisle. One image stood out, a picture of Harper standing at her locker, circled in red A and K. It was clear now that she had been watched for weeks, maybe even months. Someone had studied her routine, tracked her movements, and waited for the exact right moment to strike. But the more the investigators uncovered, the more questions emerged. Why Harper? Why the restroom? And what did the message "this was only the first" really mean? That question was answered 2 days later when the school's internal database was breached again. This time, a new document appeared on every staff member's computer. It was a spreadsheet with only one tab labeled "Next." It listed 5 names, each followed by a date. Harper's name was at the top with her death. Date already filled in. The second name on the list was Emma Carlisle, scheduled for the coming Friday. Panic set in. Police immediately searched Emma's home and began protective surveillance. Emma, frightened and confused, admitted she had no idea why anyone would target her. She and Harper had been close but hadn't noticed anything unusual, except one thing. 2 weeks before Harper's death, she had confided in Emma that she thought someone was following her at school. She didn't say much more. She just seemed nervous, distracted. Emma thought she was just stressed about finals. Now it was clear Harper had sensed something coming. She just didn't know how close it really was. The town of Millbury realized. They were dealing with more than a single tragedy. This was a chain of events designed to continue. The killer wasn't finished. The clock was ticking again, and Emma was next. Police doubled their efforts, treating the threat to Emma Carlisle as a credible and urgent matter. Officers were stationed outside her home, and she was placed under constant watch. School remained closed, and the entire East Wing was sealed off indefinitely. Investigators combed through every detail of Emma's life, hoping to find a link between her and Harper that could reveal a motive. But nothing significant stood out. They were best friends, yes, but not involved in any clubs or activities that suggested controversy. Emma had no enemies, no stalkers, and no strange messages. Until now at T1:23 a.m. on Thursday, just a day before the date listed next to Emma's name on the mysterious spreadsheet, the security team monitoring her home noticed her bedroom lights flicker, followed by a brief blackout across the entire block. When power was restored, Emma's bedroom window was open. Inside, she was gone. Panic swept through the town. Law enforcement immediately launched a search, and within 6 hours, they found Emma inside the abandoned science lab on the far end of the school campus. Her hands and feet were tied with duct tape, and a thick piece of cloth had been stuffed into her mouth. She was terrified but unharmed. She remembered nothing after falling asleep. There was no sign of forced entry in her house, and none of the doors or cameras around the lab had been triggered. Whoever had taken her had done it with practiced precision. Near her feet, investigators found a note, handwritten this time, I only wanted her to feel it, the fear Harper felt. It was signed with the symbol of an eye drawn in black ink. That same symbol was later found carved into the wood paneling beneath the lab's desk, nearly invisible unless someone was specifically searching for it. This detail changed everything. Investigators began looking into the symbol, and through school renovation records, they made a chilling discovery. During a construction project 3 years earlier, a series of maintenance tunnels had been sealed off under the east wing. These narrow spaces had once been used to access wiring and plumbing throughout the school, but had since been abandoned. At least, officially, a structural engineer was brought in to examine the area. Hidden behind a bolted utility panel in the janitor's closet, they found a narrow opening into a forgotten crawlspace. Inside was a small room filled with food wrappers, an old mattress, and a laptop still connected to the school's internal network. A functioning camera was pointed at the hallway outside the East Wing restroom. This was a surveillance den. Someone had been living here. On the wall above the mattress were dozens of printed photographs, all of students, arranged in a pattern that seemed random until investigators noticed each student had been marked either with a red X or a green circle. Harper's photo was marked with a red X. Emma's had both a green circle and an X overlapping. But the most disturbing detail was that there were 3 other photos already marked with red XS, students who hadn't been harmed yet. The list wasn't complete. The trap wasn't over. The discovery of the hidden surveillance room beneath West Hollow High turned the investigation upside down. It was no longer a theory that the killer had operated from inside the school. It was a fact. Whoever had lived in that cramped space had access to camera feeds, electrical wiring, and even emergency exit routes. They had been studying the school, mapping it out piece by piece, waiting patiently for the right time to strike. The photographs on the wall confirmed the worst fear. Harper and Emma weren't random targets. They were part of a plan, a methodical selection of victims chosen for reasons no one could yet explain. Police began cross-referencing the photos with student records, trying to identify the other names marked with red XS. 2 of them were juniors, both still alive, and placed under immediate protection. The 3rd photo, however, belonged to a former student named Kevin Breyer. Kevin had been expelled 3 years earlier after a violent outburst in class and had vanished from town soon after. Records showed he had moved with his family to another state, but a check of their address revealed something strange. The house had been abandoned for months. Kevin's parents had divorced, and neither of them had any recent contact with their son. His last known trace was an online purchase made 6 months ago. Shipped to a P.O. box in Millbury, investigators began building a profile. Kevin had always been quiet and withdrawn, often ridiculed by classmates for his odd behavior. Teachers noted his obsession with security systems and architecture, often sketching floor plans of the school during class. His expulsion had been triggered by an incident where he locked a fellow student in a supply closet for several hours. At the time, no one thought he'd return. But now, it appeared he had never truly left. They found his fingerprints on the laptop in the surveillance room. The match was conclusive. Kevin Breyer was the architect behind the bloody trap. He had returned under a false identity, blended in with night crews, and constructed his control room inside the walls of the very school that had cast him out. Every move had been rehearsed, every detail calculated. He had embedded himself into the system like a ghost, but just as investigators closed in, Kevin vanished again. A raid on an abandoned auto shop connected to his P.O. box yielded more evidence: maps, schedules, and handwritten notes, one of which read, "They only noticed when it bled." His final plan, however, remained unknown. No explosives, no manifesto, no clear endgame. The school never reopened. West Hollow High was permanently shut down, its windows boarded up, its hallway silent. Rumors spread of shadows seen in the windows at night, of alarms triggered without explanation. The town moved on slowly, nervously, always wondering if Kevin would return. On the 1-year anniversary of Harper's murder, a message appeared on the school's website for 5 minutes before being deleted. Class dismissed. For now. Kevin Breyer was never found. His trap, it seems, was never meant to end.